So today we're going to review the servo interface for CPAP and BiPAP here at Glens Falls Hospital using the Fisher&Paykel FlexiTrunk. First thing we're going to do is measure the infant's head circumference if the nurse hasn't done it already. Basically go behind the nape of the neck, that way you don't have to lift the child's head to do your measurement. Bring your 0 centimeter point of the tape measure to the middle of the forehead, assuming the bonnet isn't on. Wrap around snugly. Make sure that this is at the base of the skull or the nape of the neck, that way you get an accurate measurement. In this case, the infant's head we measured ahead of time was 39.5 centimeters. So we can pull that out. Next thing you're going to do is consider whether you want to use the bonnet or headgear. Typically the bonnets are going to be used for the smaller infants and the headgear for the larger. There is a little bit of overlap. The bonnet sizes range from 17 to 36 centimeters and the headgear measurements range from 29 to 45 centimeters. So you can basically decide which is best. So when we actually do apply those, a couple things you're going to need to keep in mind is that you want to make sure that we're covering just above the eyebrows, and then we're going to also make sure we're covering the ears and bringing the bottom of the bonnet down again to the base of the skull or the nape of the neck. Before you pull it on the infant's head, make sure you open these straps ahead of time, that way you don't have to repeatedly lift the infant's head during application. Then we're going to move over to our interface, and we're going to consider which interface we want to use. There's 3 different sizes, 70 to 100 millimeters, 50, 70, and 100 millimeters. Basically the thing we're looking for here is this non-corrugated section of the interface. We need to make sure that the distance from either the top lip to the top of the forehead or the bottom of the nose to the top of the forehead is not larger than the interface. This point cannot go beyond the top of the forehead, and the reason we say the difference between the two is whether using the nasal mask or the nasal prongs. Once you're done selecting your interface, you can go ahead and open that package. In that package you're going to find a little red warning sign basically saying handle with care, because the corrugated tubing is very delicate, and your sizing guide next. So our interface sizing guide is pretty simple and straightforward. You can literally hold it up to the infant's face, and when we do that we're going to want to make sure that we're considering the best application, that we're not having it too close to the septum for the mask, that way we're occluding the bottom of the nose or putting too much pressure on the septum, and same thing with the nasal prongs. Ideally with the nasal prongs you're going to fill 100% of the nair but not actually stretch the nair and cause any blanching. So basically find the closest fit possible. In this particular mannequin or infant, we would ideally be at 45-40 is the name of the prongs. Basically the two things that those numbers reference is the diameter of the nair, that would be the first number, and then the second number is the distance between the prongs. So again, that's kind of pointing to the fact that we need to be cautious of putting too much pressure on the septum from either side with the distance between the prongs, and obviously the size. If we're distending or stretching the nair, we could cause blanching and eventually skin breakdown there as well. We need to make sure that we document what size we're using. There is the numbers do appear on the bottom of the interface, but it's a little difficult to see, so it should make it easier for the person following you if you just go ahead and document it and let them know that you've done that. Alright, so at that point you can go ahead and grab whichever interface you're going to use, both the actual mask and prongs as well as the 50, 70, or 100 millimeter length. Once we've pulled it down over the infant's head to the appropriate place, we can unfold this portion here on the bonnet, apply this gray pad or foam right in that gap. You need to consider at this point the distance here is going to affect the angle of your interface, so you may need to remove one of these gray pads. There's 2 of them that you can remove. Then just bring this little strap around and attach to that piece of Velcro there. Make sure it's secure. Then make sure that your height is good for being in the proper place. Again, not too high and including the bottom of the nose or putting pressure on the septum. Next we're going to do our straps. When you go to do the straps, just make sure to pay attention to the orientation of the little blue hooks. Whichever is more comfortable for you is fine, but it's good just so when you go to apply them, it's going to make it a little easier if you know where they are. So attach your little white loop to your blue hook. I would apply both sides at once. At this point, it really would be ideal to have either a second therapist or a nurse to be holding this interface in place. That way the infant's definitely getting the treatment that you're trying to provide. Once you've got both of those hooks on, then you can do your strap adjustment. You're going to bring them down and basically attach that to the Velcro on the sides. Try to get a little even pressure as possible. Again, don't over tighten. Once you've applied your interface, you want to make sure that you're paying attention again to where you ended up for the nasal mask or the nasal prongs. Again, whether you're putting any pressure on the nares or the septum. That way we're being cautious of skin integrity, and then make sure to include that in your documentation. That way if you get in the habit of doing it, you're less likely to forget that step of paying attention to it. So if we're going to actually be changing the interface between the mask and the nasal prongs, there's a couple things that you want to be paying attention to. One thing would be the gray foam again. When you switch to the prongs or to the mask, you may find that the angle isn't ideal. So again, you can either add one of these gray foam pieces back in or remove it depending on what you're going to. It doesn't stick back in place necessarily, but the foam strap does hold it fairly securely. You also need to be cautious that if you're disconnecting at the where the interface meets the circuit, that if you just pull, you may risk tearing that delicate corrugated tubing. You want to make sure you twist and pull. That way you're not putting that tension on it. And once you've done all that, the last thing to do is make sure you've tied the top of the bonnet. That way we help keep the infant from having any cooling from the top of their head. We're always worried about them maintaining proper body temperature. So you can just do a little simple overhand knot there. I don't think you even really need to put a bow tie in or anything. It's pretty secure unless the infant's moving around a lot. So when you do go to connect to the servo or to the circuit, these little blue caps are going to come off to have the basically the correct adapter. And then the clear portions will hook to the circuit. Just keep in mind that you don't have to worry about which is attached to inspiratory or expiratory. Doesn't make any difference, and it will work just fine either way. Then you want to make sure to pay attention to your circuit position, and if there's any tension on it, you could use a blanket or towel underneath the circuit or some tape to secure it. Basically just make sure that there's some slack in the line so there's not tension potentially compromising your seal, causing a leak, or maybe even causing more pressure or changing the angle of your interface, risking that skin breakdown again. And just remember, sizing is everything. That was a big thing that the rep was trying to drive home to us, that if you don't have the proper size for your prongs, for your mask, and for the length of that interface, you're not going to get the right angle, and you're going to have a high risk of ending up with some breakdown in any of the various different positions. In this particular case, you probably noted as we were trying to put it on that it's a little bit on the small side for this infant. Reason being, we wanted to make sure people got to see the bonnets, but the largest size is 36 centimeters for the bonnet, and since we said it was 39.5, obviously it's a little bit on the small side. You can see that the mask here is squished down and definitely over tightened and in a non-ideal position, but we'll make sure to show you with the headgear and a more appropriate size that fits a little bit better. So I'm going to go ahead and remove this, and we'll switch over to that headgear. And it comes off pretty much as easily as it went on. So with the headgear, you're going to want to open the straps fully both the ones that are going to go all the way around the head as well as the ones that are going to attach to the interface. May have to lift the infant up all the way or be able to sneak it behind. Again, the base of this strap you're going to want at the nape of the neck or base of the skull. Watch which strap you're bringing over first. You're going to need to bring over the Velcro strap across the forehead first. Again, above the eyebrows. Then your second strap. Make sure not to go all the way because our interface is going to go underneath this second strap. Again, considering when you're putting this on whether the gray foam pieces are, you need as many as you have, or if you should take one away or not. That blue piece is going to go right up and over, back down the foam and attach securely on the other side. And we can adjust this a little bit after the fact. Bring it a little lower here. Good. Select which interface you're using. Again, could be nasal mask, which we saw before, or the nasal prongs. In this case, if we use the nasal prongs, you're just going to want to make sure you're at an optimal angle. The connection for the two is a little bit different. The nasal mask just goes into that interface, while the nasal prongs has a flange on the outside. Just something to keep in mind. It is a little bit harder to apply here. And we're going to place in the infant's nose. Being a dummy, it's a little bit harder being rubber on rubber here, but we'll get it in. Again, make sure that your prong size is not over distending those nares and risking breakdown. Then you can bring your straps up one at a time. With the headgear, you'll see that it has blue loops to connect to the hooks. It's a little different than the others. Again, I'd connect the hoops to the hook before you worry about tightening and attaching the Velcro for that portion of it. And then try and tighten them evenly. Again, beware not to have too much pressure on the septum. The height of this can play a big part. Fisher&Paykel recommends at least 0.8 centimeters from the septum. That way you're not putting that pressure and risking breakdown again. And that would be the end of the Fisher&Paykel interface in service.